Welcome to the Chalk Talk Gym podcast, where we explore insights into healthcare that help uncover new opportunities for growth and success. I'm your host, Jim Jordan. Join us for an insightful discussion with Arda Ural. He's an EY partner and America's market leader for life sciences and healthcare for E&Y. He has over 30 years of experience going from Pfizer to biotech consulting, and he brings unique perspective on the rapid evolution and innovation going on in healthcare industry. In this particular episode, we dive into the complex challenges and exciting opportunities shaping the future of life sciences. Arda shares his insights on the impact of macroeconomic trends, geopolitical shifts, and the groundbreaking advances of AI on drug development, clinical trials, and healthcare delivery. We explore how companies are navigating rising costs, regulatory pressures, and the quest for health equity in a transforming landscape. Arda also reflects on the key lessons from his remarkable career journey and what it takes to make a meaningful impact in an industry that touches all of our lives. So Arda, thank you for joining us, and tell me and the audience a little bit more about yourself.
Jim, thanks for having me. This is Arda Ural with Ernst & Young as a life sciences sector leader, and happy to be your guest today. So maybe a little bit about myself. So I started my journey with the sector about 30 or so years ago. I'm Turkish. I was born and raised in Istanbul, went to public schools over there. When I joined Pfizer, after a couple of years, they decided to relocate me to New York. That's how my journey in the U.S. continued. Obviously, immigration is for anyone. It's a trade-off. You're leaving your network, your friends and family behind in return of trying to make a bigger impact, learn more things, and get up your game, if you will, in the life sciences business, which is, usually a global business, as you know. And so that was, I think, an interesting turning point for me. So I got fortunate in Pfizer when it was growth years to launch Viagra or manage Celebrex in the US. So those were great learnings. And then took an entrepreneurial spin in 2002 to join a biotech company that was developing a first anti-VEGF treatment for the wet form of macular degeneration, which is a preventable form of blindness. So we launched the company, IPO'd the company, launched the product. I got acquired and then moved to Becton Dickinson to run a couple of businesses there, was their strategic marketing lead. And then I made the twist from the industry to the consulting side of the advisory side of the business. And then the last 8 years with EY, and I led our M&A practice for life sciences. And then for the last several years, I am accountable for our life sciences sector, spanning all of our services to our life sciences clients. So it's a multi-billion-dollar business. It's been growing double digits over the years, and I'm privileged to serve our partners in the business.
Yeah, we could talk about so many ways you fit into life sciences, because I was following some of your posts. You're into synthetic biology, you're into helping people do M&A and organize. So maybe how would you describe your role within this healthcare continuum and helping all these folks?
Thank you. Look, I think we are fortunate to be in this industry because I just got into the industry by total coincidence. It could have been another industry, but certainly this is one that makes a difference in people's lives, because ultimately we are here for whatever 80 years, 90 years, whatever the biology permits us. And then to the point that we improve the quality of life and or prolong the longevity of human being, that's the best impact we can have. And we are fortunate that anyone who's listening to this probably is fortunate to participate in that industry. So what do we do overall in my role and Ernst & Young? So we have about 400,000 people worldwide and about 80,000 in the US. Probably depending on the surges and more balanced out seasons, we have 10 to 20,000 people serving our life sciences clients in that time period. And we have a range of services to help our clients from an end-to-end perspective. We have M&A services that you indicated, M&A and strategy and transactions. We have consulting services focused on functional expertise. We have very deep tax expertise, and then also assurance services, audit services to our clients. So across those four service lines, we serve companies in the pharma, biotech, and medtech, and also like life sciences tools, animal health. Fortunately, no boring day, if you will. The challenges you're attacking are very diverse and intellectually challenging you and our team. So that's the role I've been doing for the last several years. And then certainly every day is a new day. Every day is a different day that keeps our journey going. To your point about one day you're dealing with how does the human genome can be utilized as a monetizing asset? The other day you deal with what's the synergy model for an acquisition, or the next day you deal with what's the best supply chain methodology and approach for a tech client that's going to lower their OPEX. So these are really, that what you do is something, but why you do it is also very important, because ultimately when we do our jobs, it will help prolong lives or improve quality of life, which is a great reason to be waking up every day and then going to work.
So maybe we can get, one of the things I love about talking to someone that's part of a large company, the amount of market data that comes to you on a daily basis is, every time I talk to someone like you, you're reading at least 2+ hours a day just to absorb it all. If you look at life sciences right now, what do you see as the most interesting trends for you?
I think great point, because you got to really follow, otherwise your advice will be generic or not value added. So that's a great point. So you need to really keep yourself fresh with the content that we are generating and or just third parties generating. We need to be on top of. So in terms of looking at the market today, 2024 and beyond, maybe there are, I would summarize 3 things we need to watch for our industry. And they are, I would say, macroeconomic trends are certainly, we are in the middle of an inflection point, which I'm going to come back to in a second. Geopolitical challenges is another one, those variabilities, how they affect a global industry like life sciences. And the third one, the advances of AI. Of course, it has tremendous opportunities, certain challenges to manage. But those are the 3, as I can expand on them if you're interested. On the macroeconomic one, we are coming off the end point of tremendous quantitative easing. So we are now looking at the timing, not if, but when the Fed will start tapering the interest rates, which is going to be an inflection point for us, because if you're in the M&A or if you're in the CapEx investment cycle, you watch the cost of capital, and that's what's determined right now. I think we believe we saw in the first quarter of 2024, we saw some movement in the transactions as well as IPOs, as well as some easing in the deployment total capital. We do believe it can sustain if the rates will start to be cut sometime over the summer. And that's what the odds are today. But we are recording today, and then like 2 weeks from today, you get a different payroll report or a different personal expenditure report. These things will be articulated differently. But at some point during the next 6 to 9 months, we believe a cut will happen. And then when that happens, I think the markets will be very favorable in deploying capital. And I don't mean capital markets. I don't mean stock markets, capital markets in general. And that will have a trickle-down effect on down from boards to the operating committees to the operators of the businesses. So that's one thing we are all watching. That's the macro lookout. And the second piece is in the geopolitics. Up until COVID, I think the conversations were mostly about globalization and how we discover, develop, and manufacture and then distribute products globally. But I think the COVID and then the ensuing Russia's invasion of Ukraine created people to think maybe we should rethink the globalization because political tension can get in the way. So what that means is our global supply chain, which was heavily relying on China for API and semi-finished products from India, and those numbers were, FT took down those numbers, but I think it was first originally discussed about 80% of the all active product ingredients were coming from China, is a risk for decoupled economy that, especially for life-saving medications, whether they are generics or not, you just cannot rely on a foreign sovereignty to be upstream at the beginning of the faucet. So for that reason, I think everyone, not just US, but everyone is looking for self-sustained strategies or nearshoring or friend-shoring, ally-shoring, your pick your methodology. So that's important. Also that's the manufacturing side of the house, the supply chain of the house, which we got all very sensitized during COVID. But then on the expansion side, global expansion of your portfolio was a major factor for determining your valuation and your robustness and scale. So now I think the interest is shifting more and more toward local or regional and self-sustainability. So that's clearly having a big impact on how our industry thinks about it. So that's the geopolitical piece. And then the last piece which is, I think, you just can't finish a talk or panel without mentioning Gen AI. Where we are with the Gen AI, I think it's clearly a revolution, probably the most significant technological advancement that we have seen in our lives, and potentially our people earlier in their careers will live through, notwithstanding another breakthrough comes along. Maybe it's quantum computing that's going to make things really faster, unimaginably faster than what we have today in cracking things. So AI, of course, can help us in two ways. One, the industry has been stuck at a high cost basis. So if you look at 10 years back, the industry's SG&A is about 28, 29%, didn't change. And the R&D, cost of R&D as percent of revenue has been increasing steadily. I think the number was 12% or so 20 years ago, and now it's 18% of the revenue. So something's got to give in terms of lowering the operational cost basis. And then AI is extremely well positioned to do so by automating things that would require human involvement. Now, that involvement would be flipped over as a human supervision. So that's, I think, very exciting to help the industry. The second piece on that is not just the cost lowering capability, but also accelerating drug development and commercialization and supply chain. Easiest use cases we have seen so far has been on the clinical trials. Clinical trials require a lot of regulatory and administrative and document capture steps. By asking AI to be accountable for that, just looking at the data, and just the co-pilot would summarize the data on behalf of the person and just significantly accelerating it. I just tested early on, about a year ago, what if I ask AI to write a protocol in a particular therapeutic area? And I was impressed. It was 70%. This is just generative AI, nothing proprietary, nothing trained on a particular database. It was like 70% there. The data point, the primary endpoints, the inclusion-exclusion criteria, the therapeutic area, the nuances were baked in. And this is, again, just generic. Everyone can do it with publicly available open source data. Just imagine how this could be more effective when you start training that large language model on your library of assets. And those are very easy use cases to prove how we can get there. I think that's very exciting. And then a group of people, as they should, are also raising the challenges and threats that come from AI. That's obviously a legitimate concern. Data privacy, cybersecurity, those are data governance, very real concerns. We are probably far away from the Skynet moment, but if we don't do responsible management of the AI, we can let chatbots taking over elections, or cybersecurity being at the hands of the ill-intended agents can become a big threat for the industry. So I think AI is clearly positioned very well to do a positive impact, assuming we cover it. So that's where I see the three big buckets of how the industry got to watch over the next couple of years.
I would probably add into the U.S. government negotiating drug pricing would be a pretty significant change too in the macro.
Absolutely. A great point, Jim. So we haven't seen the immediate impact of the Innovation Reduction. I keep saying Innovation Reduction. It's like the Inflation Reduction Act. I think it's a joke, for us. But the Inflation Reduction Act will have its impact in 3 to 5 year time frame, because today, while a few biotech companies have maybe deprioritized some programs, I think the bigger impact will come down the road, because the program compels you to start multiple indications at the same time, so that the clock doesn't start, ticking down on the lead indication, and you will be exposed to that. Obviously, you're going to make that list of whatever that number is going to be for you. So you started at 15, it's going to be 25, 30, 40 in the next few years. But you don't have already access to capital to start your initial trial, let alone your multiple trials. So I think the larger pharma companies with the balance sheet to afford this will be favorably positioned versus emerging biotechs who has to prioritize their initial indication. You called it out well. So IRA and other regulatory issues are going to start weighing in on the innovation pressures that we will be facing.
Yeah, and I think I tell this story sometimes about how what a chief economist would have said for drug pricing 40 years ago, not anticipating it would set us up to be a challenge. So For our audience, I'm going to do a little accounting nerd with you. So one of my favorite models is the DuPont model. And for the audience, it's net income over sales times sales over assets. It's over equity. You cancel it out and you get return on investment. And what that helps you see is net income over sales is I sold something, how much money did I make? And in the drug industry, that tends to be high because for the drug industry, it's the sales to asset, which is that capital talk that you're talking about. The drug industry a long time ago, when other governments said, we'll only pay so much for this pill, anything over variable cost, I'm trying to get money back from my clinical trials. So I think for our audience, just to maybe peel back some of the brilliant things that you said is you're fighting to keep your price, your revenue. It's really the productivity of your asset to fund your trials, which is cost of capital is in there, and then time to do the clinical trial, the number of patients that are in there. And so it's a little different from other businesses that are more driven on their return on assets from net income over sales. And I was at McKesson, and we obviously, they're Fortune 7 or something like that. And for us, it was sales over assets looking for productivity things there. Whereas when I was with Johnson, and we were selling medical devices, it was a different model. So this challenge with drug pricing, it would be very hard from a PR perspective to say to the person on the street, drug pricing's high, look at the margins they're making, but the average person doesn't understand that the number of assets that have been deployed for a decade or more. And it's a real challenge. And so the question is, how can AI make that drug discovery process? I think that's going to be the partner, as you were referring to bring down. In the old days, they used to say 2% of drug starts end up in a commercial, and you can go into the various phases and watch them drop off. And a good friend of mine, Lance Taylor, invented high content screening, and he's a CMU and now at Pitt. And he would say, fail early and fail often was his mantra. If we can bring the failure when you're doing something in the lab in early, that's a really significant amount. So how much of your specialist practice is geared towards that optimization of drug discovery and clinical trial?
Very good point. And I would also add that we are in a election year, and then drug pricing is going to keep coming up, obviously more so than before. Maybe before diving into your question, couple supplementary points to your great narrative there. The cost of drugs, average cost of drugs have been creeping up because the lower hanging fruits have been mostly picked up. Today, you don't develop an antihypertensive or antidepressant agent or even an antibiotic because the challenges to get approved because of the generics are available will be very hard. So what that pushes the industry is to become more targeted, precision products. And then those are obviously much more difficult to come up with the right precision targeting, whether it's like the anti-drug conjugates, which have been very popular recently, or monoclonal antibodies, which have been helping the industry lift from the 2010 patent cliff. So those, and then cell and gene therapies, which is, I think we got a lot of, I would say, buzz about them, but only a handful have been in the market so far because of the supply chain and commercialization personal challenges. So the bar on the industry is getting higher and higher for foundational reasons. And like you indicated, maybe the first pill costs you like $2 billion, but the next ones are like a couple cents. Yeah. So there's the problem is to get to the first pill to get there. But the industry has really a strong, I'm very impressed with the innovational, I would say the engine of innovation is certainly very strong, and all the entrepreneurs pushing hard to get to their part. So a question on the drug discovery and how maybe AI can help there is the kind of a source of a lot of dialogue. Let's give an example of the protein folding. And at some point, there are 150 million proteins, and how they connect to the cell receptors or block certain things is almost a geometrical problem as opposed to a chemistry problem. And for a human brain to compute all those with the computational skills we have today is not fast enough. And yet the OpenAI, the company, was able to, the AlphaFold that is, was able to solve those problems much faster than a person. So there is the Moore's law, if you will, that you apply to how the speed of the transistor. And then the opposite of it is like Eroom law, like spelled from backwards, which is actually the cost of products increasing exponentially. We need to make those both laws to come together and help with the product development. So the drug discovery, very early stages of it, but there are companies that have been doing it for decades. And my hope is that there's not solid evidence at this point. My hope is that it will help generate a lot of targets that are de-risked early on to help with the clinical trials, because we still go by the FDA guidelines for submitting a investigational new drug, the INDs. Still, there's the animal models, there is the kind of toxicology, there's the 2 species you got to pick up. Then you move on to the phase 1 after our INDs improved. Then the phase 1 takes certain time and money, and then you move on. I think we will probably not break that cycle, but can we accelerate some of those individual modules within that to get there? One, I think, law that's not getting a lot of attention is 2030. I believe I understand, if I'm not mistaken, the industry got to stop testing on animals. And so if that is indeed accurate, I need to check that. We can do that offline. But so that requires a lot of in silico testing. So how can we test the safety and effectiveness and early proof of concept of these products in silico without requiring animal organisms, animal models? So that's a major, lift that's getting from AI. And at least there's a solution path for these once immense kind of sounding goals or challenges. At least there's a path that AI will continue to. We are very early stages, Jim. I mean, you called it out earlier, so we are early.
So how do you keep current on all this? There's a lot of different activities that you focus on. That was one of them. We didn't even talk about M&A trends, and those are all things that you're faced with every day as part of your broader practice.
The M&A and capital deployment, I think there's enough resources there, and then we have a pretty robust team that consolidates and summarizes, and we are able to articulate the implications for the industry. And in fact, in a couple of weeks, we'll be out issuing our 34th Biotech Beyond Borders report. That's impressive. Before, the industry was really as mature as it is. So the UI started doing that. So that is clearly a team effort, but also having an open mind and not being misled by a single KPI, but more so multiple signals, including some of them, like the macro we talked about. In terms of the overall, I think you can get lost in trying to be on top of everything. You got to follow some good books. Every 6 months, I make recommendations for 5 books, and those are mostly kind of biased towards life sciences, but that kind of keeps you perspective and context on the bigger things. And then there is the daily flow of content, most of it free. If your listeners here are interested in finding, I think if they spend 30 minutes online, they will find many very insightful resources that they can gain access to stay on top. But it's an effort. It's a commitment. Like you said, you mentioned something like 2 hours. That's almost that high, because you got to follow the M&A, but you got to also follow JAMA and NEJM and other subspecialty publications as well. So you can get, I'd say, kid in a candy store, but also you can get lost. So
when you reflect back, what's the biggest lesson you've learned in your journey so far?
I think, look, this is interesting. I've been 30 years in this, and you're going to have a plan that the moment things start happening, the plan will be useless. Because if somebody asked me 32 years ago, like an engineering student in Istanbul, Arda, you will be part of a 400,000 people firm being accountable for a multi-billion-dollar P&L, I wouldn't understand what it is and wouldn't even imagine. So I think my counsel to, everyone obviously have their own lessons, but my counsel to folks who are in their early on careers, have an open mind, just have a plan, but recognize that, be ready. That plan may be useless, but it's the planning, not the plan. I think Eisenhower called it out. But also I'll call out another great philosopher, Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they're smacked in the mouth. I think that's how I looked at the journey. The other one, I think recently, the Stoics have been very popular. So I recommend folks taking a look at the Marcus Aurelius.
I just bought that book, actually.
Yeah, I did. That's good. I mean, the guy was a Roman general. His life was literally out there in the field, in the campaigns, living in the mud and fighting in the mud, and ultimately became the emperor. But his distilling down the life philosophy to just focus on what you can control, basically. Don't let your emotions get in the way. I think that's so true even in 21st century business world.
Yeah, things change so quickly and so fast that it's hard to keep track. And I will have some of my students look at my background in my resume, which was life sciences, startups, nonprofit, profit, venture capital, and academia, they say, oh, I'd like to do that. How do you do that? I'm like, you can't make a plan for that. That just, for me, I think it was finding really good companies to work with, whether large or small, but importantly, good people to work for. It's good, I think, early in your career to get that branded experience. A lot of times my students will come out and they say, oh, should I go work for a firm like yours for a few years, or should I go do the startup? I'm like, get branded first, get that experience. And later after, when you've been trained, because business school does training, but it's not the details that you've talked about here are hard won to be able to be articulated so simply. When you look at
yeah. Well said, yeah. But the other thing, maybe if I can just interject there, early on, if you operate in a process-driven company, that will teach you how it can be or it should be. And then you will have a point of view, what can you accelerate without breaking the integrity of the process and or getting in trouble. So this high integrity, high value system is certainly very key. And then once you train that, once your muscle memory is there, then you can go ahead and explore the world, if you will.
Because to that point, I think your processes are as much your brand as your product.
Exactly.
So what's your biggest opportunity for growth and your biggest opportunity for concern for healthcare as you look out?
I think we covered the Gen AI to a large extent. I think for healthcare, life sciences, what it offers as an opportunity is everyone is working on making the use cases that will scale. So that's the one that we are looking forward. And then what can go wrong? AI can go wrong if you don't govern it right. But also, I think in the next couple of years, there might be scenarios where the macro conditions may actually not necessarily be conducive to global business to operate. And while that's not the scenario we would like to see, they're probably possible. I would like to see unlikely, but you need to be ready for the possibilities, or wrong possibilities, so to speak.
I agree with that. I think that I would love to have the data to be able to understand this a little better, but you ask yourself, if you brought back some of our manufacturing base to answer those security concerns and availability concerns, how would that help our economy and help with that pull up our bottom third of our economy into maybe the middle, which would be interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other thing, maybe just a final thought here, there's the overarching sentiment, and I presented so many times on it, looking at the ROI of the spending on healthcare versus to life expectancy. And U.S. is not looking good when you compare to Europe or Japan. But there's one catch there, which I would like to leave everybody. It's about education. There was an analysis, Wall Street Journal published it, I think it's JAMA did it. So I can't quote the author, but when you dissect that data for college education, U.S.'s life expectancy is like Denmark.
Yeah.
So 40% of the U.S. population is college educated. I think if you take out 7-8% is 2-year college. If you just take that out, it gets even more compelling. So education and healthcare go hand in hand. And then the health equity and education go hand in hand as well. So if you fix those things, education and health equity, I think everyone will have a very positive lift up from all the metrics we are looking. And that will be probably a great long-term goal for anyone with the abilities to influence that.
Fantastic. Anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
I thank you very much for having the dialogue here. I think very interesting times with what AI can offer to us, and looking forward to continuing the journey with all your listeners.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Chalk Talk Gym podcast. For resources, show notes, and ways to get in touch, visit us at chalktalkgym.com.